Welcome to the Great Debate, this special edition without J-Rock again because he's decided not to give a shit anymore about this network apparently. So you're stuck with your host, Rob, mediating between our two video game hosts themselves. Mike the Greek of Joystick Judgment Day faces off against Jedi J of the Arcade. And what might be one of the most controversial episodes of the Great Debate as we try to figure out the best NES game out there. Now, of course, there's a big asterisk on this one. We aren't going to be talking about the Mario series at all because both shows, Great Debate in its infancy and Jedi J on the Arcade, we've all kind of said that Mario 3 might be the best NES game of all time. Maybe even the best game of all time.
Yeah, I don't think Joystick Judgment Day is going to dispute that one either.
So there you go, 3 for 3. So we're sticking to some other of the NES classics.
Oh my god.
And we've got it broken into 5 rounds. 10 games will be facing off for what I'm going to declare as the best NES game outside Mario 3. In round 1, we've got Contra versus Final Fantasy. Round 2, Tecmo Bowl versus Blades of Steel. Round 3, Zelda versus Mega Man 2. Round 4, Battletoads versus Ninja Gaiden. And round 5 is Metroid versus Castlevania. So, Mike the Greek versus Jedi J. Round 1, Mike the Greek has picked Contra. Jedi J, you've got Final Fantasy.
All right.
We're going to go with Mike the Greek first. Mike, the floor is yours.
Well, I have to say, Rob, if it weren't for Contra, I don't think we'd ever have games like Gears of War, like Call of Duty. Pretty much any action game that we play today owes some kind of debt to the run and gun mechanics that were basically established and perfected with Contra. That was one of those games when I'd say maybe 8 or 9 years old. That was the game that if it was like an ice storm outside, you got the shovel out and you went to your buddy's house to play it if you didn't have it. Even if you did have it, you just had to go play the co-op. It introduced the Konami code. It's just so legendary, and I think it's one of those games that a sequel only comes out like maybe every 10 years, so it's always a big thing when a new grinder Contra comes out. And again, Contra 3 probably was one of the greatest SNES games as well.
Okay, thank you, Mike the Greek. Jedi J, you have the floor. Feel free to refute anything he has said about Contra, or feel free to just outright promote Final Fantasy. The floor is yours.
Okay, so is this going to be, like, I'm just curious, because Mike talked about Contra 3 and whatnot. So this, the Final Fantasy series?
Well, I mean, you can choose to define your argument as you so wish. We're trying to keep it to the NES game, the specific one, the first one.
That was kind of a sprinkle on the cupcake there, Jay. So that was kind of like, I'm not really talking about the series, but more just kind of bringing it into perspective.
On a side note, I think it's interesting that you have to point to the third game and not talk about the first one. Maybe there's something wrong with that. Go ahead, Jedi J. The floor is yours.
Wow, I think you two should be going at it. But anyways, in this debate, I just want to point out I'm not about to slam any of these games because they're all incredible games.
Okay, quit being the Democratic guy. I want to make
without any of
happy.
these titles, there would not be the games we have today. So that being said,
let's just be devil's advocate for today. There's no love lost.
No. Enough of the bullshit. Get to the fucking dirt, boys. Why is Final Fantasy better than Contra?
Final Fantasy was the first, if not the first RPG, the first great RPG. Starting off with, you could pick your team. You could pick your class between warrior, white mage, black mage, red mage, etc. I mean, I don't think a lot of RPGs even let you do that today. It was one of the first games I played where I felt like I was actually sucked into this world, and the story was something that was driving me to play, which was very rare back then. Without Final Fantasy, there would be no RPGs of today. Not only that, there wouldn't be an MMO genre at all. The RPGs of today, they owe everything to Square and Final Fantasy.
All right, Mike the Greek, this is your chance to either introduce new items to the argument of why Contra is better than Final Fantasy, and I remind both of you to stick on why one of these games has to be eliminated. So why is Contra better than Final Fantasy, or why is Final Fantasy better than Contra? Which one should be considered the better NES game? Go, Mike the Greek, feel free to refute or add.
Okay, so I'm going to refute. I'm going to say that Contra was definitely, from my perspective, being kind of like in between the gamer crowd and like just the regular kind of crowd who kind of casually plays games, Contra was really just omnipresent in that time. Everybody was playing Contra, whereas Final Fantasy was more of like a niche thing back then. It was still a new idea. It was more of like, I remember for me, it was more like the kids who were into like computers or the kids who were in the gifted program or something like that. It was serious.
Are you calling me a retard, Mike? Is that what you're calling me?
Do not play this game unless you're gifted.
Well, no, I'm just saying, like at 10 years of age or 9 years of age, whatever I was when it came out, it was an intellectually, challenging game. I mean, I wasn't used to that kind of level, and I don't think even for me, I couldn't really get into that game until I was at least maybe 12 or 13 years old. So, but Contra was just kind of, pick up and play. Everybody was playing it, and my other point is that while Final Fantasy 1 may be a great game, I think the Legend of Final Fantasy has become kind of tainted in the last few years. Whereas
we're not talking about now. We're talking about back then.
That's a demerit. That's a demerit, Jay. Wait for your turn to slam your opponent on his own faulty logic. Go ahead. Finish up, Mike. Finish up.
Okay, but I'm just saying that through bad sequels, it kind of tarnishes the legend of the first one somehow.
Okay, Jedi Jay, final point on round one. Go.
Mike the Greek, I didn't want it to come to this, my friend. We both share such a passion for games. You want to talk about bad fucking sequels, mate? Oh my god. I'm not even going to get on to the Contra sequels. They are all awful except for the very first game. The first Contra arcade game and the first Contra NES game are great. The rest are throwaway. The reason Final Fantasy is better is simple. 20-25 hours of gameplay versus 5 to 7 minutes it takes to beat Contra. The only thing Contra is remembered for nowadays is that stupid fucking Konami code that's this big fucking hipster trend. Final Fantasy by far is the better value. You could go through that game multiple times with different parties, have a totally different experience. Thank you.
All right, gentlemen, both interesting points on Contra versus Final Fantasy. We move now to round two, and what could be classified as perhaps the sports round, where Mike the Greek will be arguing Tecmo Bowl versus Blades of Steel. Go ahead, Mike the Greek. Start this round off.
Tecmo Bowl was really the game that brought... Okay, when I was a kid, Blades of Steel was the shit, obviously. All of us were playing it. It was a fun arcade game, but Tecmo Bowl was really the first true sports sim on the NES. And I remember people my brother's age who were like in college, high school, university, who were only playing sports games on the PC.
You're a fucking 5-year-old playing with college kids?
Well, I mean, I was...
Sorry, go ahead. That's one demerit for me.
I was a product. Demerits for you.
Fucking passed around frat houses as a fucking 4-year-old.
I'll tell you.
Easy, boys.
I'll tell you. It's no, but okay, so... Basically, the older crowd, when Tecmo Bowl came out, and it was expensive, okay? I had to go to Detroit and buy it for $50 because it was like $150 here in Canada. It was something stupid. Oh, it was ridiculously expensive, like maybe $120. But anyway, at the time, you could only play realistic sports sims on the PC, like the first John Madden, Lakers versus Celtics, stuff like that. Hardcore sports gamers didn't even take the NES seriously until Super Bowl came out. I remember all the adults started buying NESs around Super Bowl, and they would only play that until, of course, the Genesis came out, and that was the next logical step forward for sports game players.
All right, Jedi Jay, feel free to refute Mike's traumatic college or frat house stories with Blades of Steel.
Mike, why did you have to go to fucking Detroit, man, to get a game?
Because they were cheaper back then. Remember, the exchange was crazy. So, like, I bought my while the NES was $200 here in Canada, it was like $80 in Florida. So it was like a radical.
So you went to Florida for your NES and Detroit for Tecmo Bowl?
I went to Disneyland and bought my NES on the side. So it was a great vacation.
Okay, well, I'm going to start off this by saying I'm not a sports fan by any means. I do own both of these titles. Tecmo Bowl is amazing. However, Blades of Steel was one of the first realistic sports simulators where Tecmo Bowl, you had these real cartoony, beefy, kind of action figure looking guys. There was really only one play you could run in Tecmo Bowl that actually would ever get you a score. That was like the deep pass or whatever it was. Blades of Steel was realistic. Not only was it realistic, You had fights in it, which was crazy. Up until then, all you had to compare it to was Ice Hockey by Nintendo, which was again a great game, but not realistic at all. Blades of Steel was realistic, and man, I think it was in between Period 2 and Period 3. You got to play fucking Gradius, man, for like 30 seconds. So the fact that you could play another Konami game inside a Konami game at the time fucking blew me away. Blades of Steel, bitch.
All right, Mike the Greek, refute or add?
I think you just gave yourself 2 demerit points there, Jedi J, just by saying the fact that they had to throw in a mini game just to hold your interest in such a boring hockey sim. You call that a sim? Let's talk about hits the pass, let's kick the puck in the net. Oh, let's get into 10 fights in period 1. Oh yeah, that was so realistic. I think when you bash Tecmo Bowl, you're referring to the first one. We're talking about Tecmo Super Bowl, where it brought in every single player, every licensed team. You could play a full season. It was just, and in terms of plays, it doubled the amount of plays that you could pick on screen. All of them were effective. I would use my whole entire playbook, plus I could make custom plays. Okay, so in terms of depth, in terms of realism, and you talk about these pixelated players, these fat players, well, that was only heightened though. But Blades of Steel didn't even have the cinematics to punctuate the action on screen. So Super Bowl was more like a broadcast, whereas Blades of Steel just kind of felt like flat pixel characters.
All right, Jedi J, last chance to refute before we move on to round 3.
I fucking hate sports. I rest my case.
Okay, on to round 3, where we got Legend of Zelda versus Mega Man 2. Two giants of the NES, that's for sure. Again, we're talking about these games specific, not the games that came before or after. So, Mike the Greek, let's start off with The Legend of Zelda. Go.
I think when it comes to just the iconic in terms of characters, Link really takes the cake. I mean, you mentioned, Jay, that Final Fantasy was the real first true RPG. Well, I think Zelda was the first RPG that really brought RPGing to the masses in such a way that Final Fantasy, with its PC-like complexity, couldn't bring to the more limited experience of like maybe a 10-year-old or 11-year-old who could more easily handle Legend of Zelda. And I mean, what happened was that they just create these compelling characters, this beautiful land of Hyrule. They introduced mechanics that are still copied and are just complete and mandatory tropes of RPGing today. We owe it all to Legend of Zelda, one of the most iconic series, and probably my front runner for greatest game of all time on the NES.
All right, Jedi J, feel free to pick them apart or just, defend Mega Man 2.
Well, first of all, Zelda was the first action RPG. It wasn't the first RPG that would be Final Fantasy. Mega Man. What do I say against Mega Man going against The Legend of Zelda? Iconic characters again. Rockman in Japan. This guy is legendary. Mega Man 2, arguably the best Mega Man in all 6 of the NES. All 6 of the NES games. You could go through this game, and once you beat the boss, you got their power, and holy shit, it was like a brand new game. The weapons were absolutely incredible. The bosses were huge. Dr. Wily was a great antagonist, and then Rush came in later. Man, Mega Man is awesome. Everyone knows Mega Man.
All right, Mike the Greek. Final point for round 3.
I think everybody knew Mega Man. Maybe you went back in like 1989 when they used to at Masonville. That was the only Masonville Mall. I remember CompuCenter. The only game they had playing on that fucking Commodore 64 monitor, if I think counted 5 years, was the Mega Man 2 title screen. It actually burned into the screen. That's how big this game was back then. But then through a whole bunch of basically reskinned sequels where it's the same graphics engine and just different bosses and just another big circle jerk of hardcore time jump platforming, I think it just kind of lost its seal in popular culture. I mean, you still have the diehards that play Mega Man, but Zelda, okay, that's just an event when that game comes out. I think it's even surpassed, in my opinion, Mario, because Mario there were just too many fucking properties in that series that really diluted it, whereas Zelda, we only see a game every few years and they're always rocking. So I mean, it just carries on, and in terms of, you mentioned Japan, like Rockman being big in Japan, whereas Zelda is big globally.
All right, Jedi J, take on the mantle with Mega Man 2 and seal the deal.
Okay, so you're attacking the sequels of Mega Man, saying they're different skins and whatnot. Let's talk about the smashing sequel to The Legend of Zelda. Yeah, Dead Silence. About 3 people played that fucking game. What they do is took the quote-unquote successful range of Zelda, and they turned it into a side-scroller. That doesn't make any kind of sense at all. You overlay it with this pathetic, like, kind of dirty, weird map thing. They tried to tie in like not real-time strategy events, but like kind of Final Fantasy, where you're just running along and then boom, a monster comes, and then you go in this side-scrolling event and you have to fight these monsters again. They throw away the Ganon character at the end of the game. You end up fighting yourself. You want to talk about palette swapping? It's just a black version, a shadow version of Link. Zelda 2 is awful, man, so don't even get in on the sequels. Let's not forget the CDI sequels, too, that Nintendo lent out to Philips.
I love how you just, like, carefully dance around the beam.
Okay, that's it. That's it. It's over. We've had our chance, boys. We both had 2 points. We'll move on to round 4, where we have Battletoads versus Ninja Gaiden. Go ahead, Mike the Greek.
Battletoads for me was the beginning of the next gen on NES. I remember that game came out of nowhere. It didn't really have a lot of build up. There wasn't a lot of hype leading up to it. I remember I discovered it in the neighborhood. My buddy's buddy had rented it, and they had been playing it, I think, for 10 hours that day, and that was something to me back then. Like, I wasn't used to marathon grinds of gaming, so I'm like, what makes this game worth playing 10 hours straight? And as soon as I picked up the controller, I knew. Flawless controls, graphics beyond their time, sound design, like just this incredibly crafted new IP where every screen was just a piece of art and every game mechanic just constantly changed, pulling out all the stops for the NES, taking that technology to its peak in the wake of the Super NES coming out. It was great. It's just a great swan song for that amazing console.
All right, Jedi J, you're up. Ninja Gaiden.
Ninja Gaiden to me will always be at least in the top 3 hardest of all NES games of all time. This game, I just get shivers even thinking about it. I never ever even got close to beating the first game. Fucking impossible birds near the end. You would get hit, boom, into a pit, boom, into a pit, boom, into a fucking pit, start again.
Okay, angry video game nerd.
No, everything James says is true. This game is, if you can beat Ninja Gaiden 1,
brutal grinder.
That's right. Not 2, which is a lot easier, and not 3, Dark Sword of Chaos. Number 1, if you could beat Ninja Gaiden 1, you were a fucking wicked player. You were the fucking wizard. Because it is one of the hardest games. And you know what, Mike? I will give credit to Battletoads too, because I love both these games. Battletoads, if you can fucking beat that game as well, again, you're a wizard, because Battletoads is equally as hard.
So, what's your point, Jedi J? That they're both hard? That's your argument for Ninja Gaiden?
Which one?
No, it's hard for me to slam. I love both those games. It really is hard for me.
You gotta imagine every one of these rounds is like you can only have one of these games for the rest of your life, and why are you choosing one or the other? So give us at least one fucking quality point why you would rather have Ninja Gaiden around versus Battletoads.
The story of Ryu Hayabusa is an amazing story. It's told throughout 3 tales, or 3 games if you will. Just his struggle, how he has to go and avenge his family, save his girlfriend, and destroy the ultimate evil. I mean, it's a classic tale, but it's told with like ancient Japanese lore and ninjas and stuff. Ninja Gaiden all the way.
All right, Mike, Battletoads, second chance, give her a go.
Okay, while I appreciate the cinematics of Ninja Gaiden and telling a compelling story, when it really comes down to just the pure form of video games as a medium, Battletoads really uses the medium to its advantage to tell a story without using cuts. Well, there's very minimal cutscenes in that. It's more told through camera angles, through facial expressions, which are incredible. I mean, you see the literal jaws dropping. It's staying true to its medium and finding how video, and I think that's why Battletoads ultimately over Ninja Gaiden elevates video gaming as an artistic medium, because it gets to that pure form of storytelling and using the mechanics that are available without the need for scripted cutscenes.
All right, Jay, go ahead. Last chance to defend Ninja Gaiden.
The needless two-player element that they put in Battletoads, their shameless attempt at trying to rip off the Ninja Turtles of the late 80s, early 90s is pathetic. You try and play co-op in that game, good fucking luck. Your buddy lags behind it all, you're done. Not to mention that you can beat your own guy up, and then guess what? You're starting at the fucking beginning again. Battletoads is not known for its great game. Battletoads is known for its legendary jokes on the internet. Prank calls to video game stores. The game's just a fucking joke, plain and simple.
All right, we move to our final round, round 5,
There we go.
where Mike the Greek will take Metroid and Jedi J will take Castlevania. Mike the Greek, go ahead. Tell us why Metroid is fucking great and deserves to be one of, the best NES games of all time.
It's one of the first. It's one of the first concepts of open world kind of sandbox action RPG gameplay. There are just so many genres mishmashed into this legendary open world masterpiece. There's RPG elements. You can upgrade your weapons and abilities. You can discover new zones, revisit old ones. There's looting. It's just anything like BioShock or Skyrim or like Borderlands, like Symphony of the Night, like Metroidvania. I mean, if you want to talk about it has so many genres that so many games over a wide spectrum owe something to Metroid. It is just perfect. And a female protagonist in an age where there were no female protagonists. That just gives it an extra notch right there.
All right, Jedi J, let's talk about Castlevania. Go.
The first Castlevania for me, it will always hold a special place in my heart. Now this game, and everyone's gonna laugh, but when I played it as a kid, it was spooky. The first shot you see of Simon going up and looking at Dracula's castle, you're like, oh fuck, it is on. I have to go in there and kill this motherfucker. This game encompasses all the great monsters of Hollywood. You have Frankenstein, the Mummy, the Werewolf, the fucking Freddy Krueger's probably in there too, who knows. This game had great gameplay, a power-up system, and spawned many sequels. In fact, Castlevania holds the world record for most sequels in video game history. The second Castlevania and third Castlevania on the NES were also masterpieces. I know we're just talking about the first one, but I have to give a shout out to number 2, which also has great RPG elements in it that blow Metroid way far away.
All right, Mike the Greek, last chance. Metroid.
Well, it's funny, you talk about all these monsters. I think you're referring to maybe the Universal monsters, like those old cheesy, like Bela Lugosi. I would say that Castlevania, in all its cheesiness and like over-the-top horror elements, and just endless sequels. I mean, I think that's more of a negative than a positive, because the series becomes so diluted. But going back to this, I would say if Castlevania is Bela Lugosi, then Metroid is like Gary Oldman and Bram Stoker's, just cooler, darker. You want to talk about dark and creepy games? Metroid creeped the shit out of me when I was a kid. It was like watching Aliens, like, in space no one can hear you scream. Very minimal soundtrack, very minimal sound effects, things just rushing out at you in the blackness of this game. It was just, whereas like Castlevania is kind of like that over the top kind of gothic, colorful version of horror. Metroid really gets down to the primal fear.
All right, Jedi J. Castlevania, this is the last word in the round before I deliver judgment. Go.
You're saying, you're talking about Universal monsters and Hollywood and stuff. I know a little bit about film, not too much. I would say that's a compliment to Castlevania. Look at some of the fucking monsters in Metroid, man. You have like little turtle shell spiked fucking worm things. Like, it's ridiculous. At least Castlevania had monsters that you could be afraid of and relate to, not a fucking green blob of pixels. Oh, that's a boss. Pretty exciting. And you would get power-ups in Metroid like missiles and freeze guns and stuff, which all basically did the same fucking thing. There's nothing fucking cooler than Simon Belmont's fucking whip, next to maybe if you had indies. That's all I gotta say, man. Castlevania for life. Cheers!
All right, guys, you put a lot of lot of things out there that I didn't even consider. I mean, looking at these 10 games, you know, there's things I like about a lot of them, but you know, listening to some of your arguments for better or worse actually brought out a few different things. So I'm going to take this round by round, the J-Rock style. Round 1, Contra versus Final Fantasy. You know, I think of Contra as one of those fun games where, you know, you pick up, you shoot the shit out of things. Everybody's, you know, fighting for the spread power up because it's, you know, the best gun enhancement. And then, of course, the code. The code is legendary. It is a bit hipsterish. If you don't know the code, you aren't anything, you know, any kind of gamer whatsoever. But then I think about Final Fantasy. And
What's the code, Rob?
You shut the fuck up. And then I think about Final Fantasy, and I think about this really setting the stage for a lot of gifted children, apparently.
That was good, Mike. That was good, by the way.
Who you know don't have ADHD and can stomach a 25-hour storyline. Final Fantasy was probably the first game that I remember that you couldn't beat within a 10-hour span, that you couldn't beat within an afternoon. So you know, I gotta give you know, thinking about both of these, and Mike, I gotta discredit your argument. You said, you know, without Contra there would be no Gears of War, no first-person shooter stuff. There's lots of examples before Contra. Contra was a good hit. Wasn't impressed with the sequel. Final Fantasy, some of those sequels have gone way off, even though we're talking about the first one for NES. You know, and replayability, who is really going to replay the first Final Fantasy over and over and over again all the way through? They might start and play it again. So replay-wise, it's got to go to Contra, but story-wise, it's got to go to Final Fantasy. Of the two, I'm going to declare Final Fantasy the winner of round 1.
Oh, yeah, baby.
Now we move to round 2.
That's one.
Now we move to round 2. It's Tecmo Bowl versus Blades of Steel. Jay, you kind of gave up on this round because you hate sports and you rested your case. So
that's true. I don't know much about either game, to be honest. So
I basically got to default to Tecmo Bowl on this one, mainly because I fucking hate Blades of Steel for a lot of the reasons that Mike said. You know, hits the pass, but it's that bloody awful perspective that they give you, that like sort of side, but I'm still looking down on the ice a little bit. You can't really judge the angles at all. It's a fucking travesty. At least when ice hockey did the left and right perspective, they had enough, you know, sense to make it overhead so you could play the game and get a good grasp of strategy and stuff. So Tecmo Bowl, for all the reasons Mike said, and for all the reasons, you know, that Blades of Steel sucked. So,
and I just want to say, I don't know if I wasn't listening properly, but Mike, I did think it was the first Tecmo Bowl. And to be honest, I've never played Super Tecmo Bowl, so all my points were from the first Tecmo Bowl.
Okay, so round 3. This is definitely a tough one. Zelda versus Megaman. In Legend of Zelda, you obviously got, you know, a franchise, and as you do with Mega Man 2, Zelda, like you said, Jay, is an action RPG adventurer, you know, where you could go around fighting monsters, going into dungeons, collecting stuff. Little, not so hardcore. Maybe you don't need to be a gifted child to play this kind of RPG, but you can have fun, you know, delving into the RPG elements of this. Mega Man 2 is a little bit more like Contra, maybe, in that it's a side-scrolling blaster kind of, you know, take apart enemies as they come. There's also a lot of power-up basis. But I paired these two together because I found that they're both a little more iconic and they are legendary characters. So when I got to consider these, I got to consider how much fun in it that I had playing both of them based on your arguments and, you know, the replayability and, you know, which one would I go back and play first. And I got to say, it's probably going to be Legend of Zelda. There's just a lot of cool, fun stuff happening in that game. And as much as I love Mega Man 2, I don't have the patience to deal with the difficulty that game has, because fuck, it's unforgiving at times trying to fight all those bosses and then having to beat them all again at the end once you beat the first round. So Legend of Zelda, because it's just classic, good storytelling, fun to progress through all the different dungeons and whatnot. So
the only thing I could have taken on Zelda with, I think, is Mario 3. So good job, Mike.
So round 4, Battletoads versus Ninja Gaiden. I'm sorry, Mike the Greek. I do not want to see this fucking rip-off of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles on steroids for a fucking IP that I could care less about, that has co-op mode, that is the fucking worst concept ever. There is nothing long-lasting about Battletoads. I don't even think it spawned sequels. It's one of those games made by Rare that people have fond, slapsticky memories of it. But it's hard, but it's not even fun hard. It's stupid hard. Ninja Gaiden, at least you feel like there's an accomplishment when you play that game and you get the different power-ups. Yeah, it's completely unforgiving. And yeah, we referenced the Angry Video Game Nerd episode where James goes and talks about how the birds hit you back and you fall into the pit over and over and over again. But when you beat that game, you actually feel proud. Versus Battletoads, it's like, who gives a fuck if you beat Battletoads? I don't think it's a next-gen fucking kind of heralding classic like you say. I really think it's a poor attempt at imitating what's in the arcade already, and they just didn't translate well enough to the NES home system, and it didn't bring anything new that we hadn't seen before. So for that round, Ninja Gaiden all the way.
Yeah.
So that leaves us tied at 2-2, boys, where it's Final Fantasy, Tecmo Bowl, Zelda, and Ninja Gaiden. Now we go to round 5. Now this is a really interesting round because, again, we're talking about both games that are the start of the franchise. You got Metroid, which, Mike, like you said, is this weird kind of space, psychological, open-ended, puzzle-like world, versus Castlevania, which is like a straight-up genre, spooky horror kind of, gotta go kill Dracula. And based on solely what you guys said, I'm gonna have to go with Castlevania on this one. I know there's going to be a lot of people that are going to be pissed that I'm not giving a lot of love to Metroid, but here, it's simple, okay? Castlevania may have been one of the first games that started the whole horror genre that is so popular nowadays. And it's also got a clear and concise goal. I gotta go kill Dracula. Here's what I gotta do along the way. Metroid, like a lot of games on the NES, and not for their credit, gets so fucking boring and confusing where you gotta go back and forth that it actually detracts from the game instead of supporting the awesomeness of the game. Castlevania, just overall fun. You criticize it for going after the universal monsters, Mike, and I gotta say that's an element that people are universally being able to connect to, whereas Metroid, like Jay said, has all these little weird invented monsters and little enemies that nobody could care less about, and there's no attachment. So Castlevania. Now, the question comes. Jedi J has won the battle of rounds against Mike the Greek, but which game is the best game overall? And out of the winners, Final Fantasy, Tecmo Bowl, Legend of Zelda, or Ninja Gaiden, or Castlevania, I'm gonna have to go probably out on a limb here, and I'm gonna have to say Final Fantasy is the best NES game outside of Mario 3.
Really?
I'm going to have to say that. I know a lot of people out of those would say Legend of Zelda, hands down, but, there's just not enough in Zelda to make you coming back. It's a game that is conflicted in what it wants to be. It's not quite an RPG. It's not quite an action-adventure. You want to talk about a game like Metroid that has you wondering where to go with all the fucking little small screens that you got to go side to side on, with all the stupid enemies that keep respawning. It's more frustration than it is delivering on the goods, whereas Final Fantasy has an overall compelling story and has way more replayability for the fact that you can customize much more in Final Fantasy than you can in Legend of Zelda. Sure, Legend of Zelda might be more epic and it might be more of an accomplishment maybe to complete, but Final Fantasy, I think, in the long run, because of the original game, really set the stage for a lot of things to come. So that's the final line. According to this guy here, Final Fantasy outside of Mario 3 is the best NES game for all those reasons and more, especially the ones that Jay said. But guys, let's open it up. Maybe let's talk about these games a little bit and some of the ones that were off the list. What do you guys think?
Mike, I'm shocked as shit, I think, just like you are. I thought 100%, 100% as soon as I saw that list today, I thought whoever gets Zelda wins. That's what I thought.
Yeah, but I totally see Rob's point here. I mean, again, in terms of just lasting appeal, I mean, you got to take nostalgia versus lasting appeal. Okay, some games are with nostalgia, like Blades of Steel. I enjoyed that game. That game was amazing back in the day. Until NHL hockey came out, that was really the most fun arcade-style hockey game to play.
Fuck that. I'd take ice hockey over that any fucking day. That game is a piece of shit.
Ice hockey was slower, and it didn't have the action. It really depends on your flavor. There's the ice hockey camp.
My flavor is fucking better than yours, and Blades of Steel is a piece of shit no matter how you cut the cake.
Your flavor is... Okay, anyway.
Yeah, keep trying, Mike.
No, but okay, game off. Okay, go. I'd like to pass this to you here. Games off the list.
Ice hockey is like Ice hockey is the hockey game for people who don't like real hockey, which is myself.
No, that's bullshit. I fucking love real hockey, and I love ice hockey because it's not trying to be more than it isn't. It's like Blades of Steel is taking on too much that it can't handle everything that it's trying to set out to do, and it just overcomplicates itself.
But it's trying to be a simulator, like Mike said, whereas ice hockey,
fast.
you
Ice
pick
hockey
the fat
was
guy,
slow and hockey is fast.
you pick the fat, the skinny, and the medium, go, and then you hold the puck, you hold A or B, and remember you do that massive slap shot. Like ice hockey was for guys like me who like I like the idea of hockey, but I don't like to watch hockey, and I could care less about real teams. So for me, I like the ice hockey. That was wicked.
Okay, so Mike, you wanted to open up the conversation to games that were not included on the list. Now, I got to tell you guys, I picked these games specifically because they were the most occurring games that were nominated in the top 20 NES games of all time. So that's where this list came from. But, you know, again, outside the Mario series, what are some other like honorable mentions do you guys think?
Absolutely DuckTales. My God, like, I mean, outside of Mario 3 and like, you know, Ninja Gaiden and stuff like that, this is one of the greatest platformers out of all time. Like,
what do you think about that, Jedi Jed? Do you think Mike the Greek's maybe just getting a little nostalgic since, you know, DuckTales has been, you know, recently announced as an HD release, or do you really think it deserves to be in the pantheon of platformers?
It does. Back in the late 80s, early 90s, Capcom had a real strong grasp on these games. They did Chippendales Rescue Rangers, which was also...
It was a fucking amazing game.
It was amazing, man.
Yep,
they did
absolutely.
DuckTales. They did Little Mermaid, which was also wicked. They did a lot of Disney stuff.
Well,
but
my only beef with DuckTales, and I like the IP and I like what they did with it, but it's essentially a fucking clone of Mega Man. I mean, let's be honest. Another Capcom title. You got fucking Scrooge McDuck picking, you know, 6 different worlds to go to, and he's going against it. So
here's the fork in the road, though. Mega Man is like a timing, hand-eye coordination grind, whereas DuckTales is one of the first loot fests. Where
so it's the difference between something you got to be good at and something that you can just fucking waste your time with.
Not wasting time, it's more about exploration. And when you're a kid, you really like to explore things, and that's what I found appealing to it at like 8 or 9 years of age, was just the fact that I could stop the action, go look for secret rooms, and be rewarded for just looking at all the cool level design and secret characters I might meet.
Now, is this after you were done hanging out with the college kids getting passed around like a rag doll, or
yeah, you know, like when I was hungover at
Okay, so what other games? I love DuckTales, don't get me wrong. I just think because it's a Capcom title, they borrowed a lot. I would probably put Rescue Rangers ahead of it because I liked a lot of the scale stuff they did. I thought there was a lot of innovation there. But let's talk about some other games that were left off this list.
You know, I gotta give a special shout out to my favorite NES game of all time, which is Balloon Fight by Nintendo.
oh yeah,
It's still my favorite game. Now, it borrows heavily from an Atari game called Joust, yes. However, I find it does it better. And Balloon Fight, not only is it rare to find still, but it's just one of the most fun co-op games out there still. Hours of fun.
Mike the Greek, thoughts on Balloon Fight or another honorable mention?
I'm going to kind of split this up. So Balloon Fight, I absolutely agree. It's one of the very first deathmatch games other than Joust. I mean, that was really done well. I mean, it's just you and either the campaign or you against another enemy, and it was just a fun multiplayer deathmatch game with a cool concept. And then I think we would also be remiss to leave Mike Tyson's Punch-Out off this list. I think people would strangle us if we didn't mention Mike Tyson's Punch-Out.
That was another one that was definitely high up there, but it was always near the bottom of the top 25 list for most people. So,
I think that's a travesty. I think that's one of the games that people constantly mention when I mention NES. It's like, oh, Mike Tyson's Punch-Out. Everybody knows how to beat Don Flamenco. Everybody knows how to beat King Hippo. It's just, I think those lists you're referring to, that's one of those errors. Like, they just didn't put that game up higher because for me, just like looking at the climate, Mike Tyson's is definitely top 10.
Well, here's a game. Go ahead, Jake. Talk about Punch-Out.
I was just going to say, Tyson's was great because it was also one of those rare NES games that, you know, the guys you were fighting were so gigantic. Like, the characters on the screen were huge, man.
Sprites were awesome.
I mean, that's one thing that made, going off topic a little bit, that's one thing that made, for me, the Neo Geo so great was the characters were so big, and to have like an NES game where the characters were so big, it was really quite an achievement. Yeah.
So one of the games that cracked the top 15, I looked at about 10 different lists, and one of the games that cracked it a few times was Captain Skyhawk. Discuss.
That's interesting. I remember seeing 2 screenshots for that, which turned out to be cutscenes. And I don't know, it was always pricey. I was always kind of intent on buying it, but something was holding me back, like instinct. And I've heard through the years, I still have yet to play it, but I heard it's pretty miserable.
Jay?
I don't know what that's doing.
I'll say, Mike, you ain't missing much.
I'm just kidding, guys. It's not on the fucking list.
Really?
It's a puddle of piss.
Okay, because I remember there were like 2 screens in the ad that I kept seeing, and it was like, oh wow, the graphics look incredible. Like this is gonna be like better than a Genesis game, and I don't know, what's it, like a top-down shooter or something?
It's like a plane simulator, kind of like a different perspective of like Star Fox, a little bit of Legendary Wings action.
Like a green pixel for a tree or something? Or?
No, it's actually a little bit more in depth than that. They really pushed the polygon count on it, but it's not,
polygon count.
it's not much more than what you would expect, really.
Rob had a very, very interesting, and I use the term loosely, interesting NES library. Was that one werewolf we used to play?
Oh fuck that! You want to talk about hard games that are obscure? I had this game called Werewolf: The Last Warrior. Oh my God. Fucking Data East, like you said, and it's kind of like a weird version of Altered Beast, but it was like there was a sci-fi aspect to it, and I don't know, really hard. But of my collection.
Hey, Rob, were you one of those weirdo kids that nobody hung out with that played Faxanadu and Excise?
I was one of those guys because I wasn't invited to the frat parties as a 4-year-old.
That's right.
I was playing Blaster Master instead and Clash at Demon Head and Wizards and Warriors.
You mentioned one there. Blaster Master is high up on the list for me.
All right, you guys are talking about hard games. Here's a good pair for you. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the first one, versus Batman, Sunsoft.
Yeah.
Those are kind of yin and yang, okay? Batman's very calculated, very well designed. Ninja Turtles is only hard because it's such a broken mess. I think that's, again, one of those nostalgia games where we loved the franchise so much when we were kids, and it felt so good. Like, the controls were good. We kind of didn't notice the fact that different enemies would respawn when you entered the sewers a second time.
I noticed that none of the enemies were anywhere near the comics or the cartoon show.
Well, it's like AVGN, like James said. I mean, like, where did Inferno guy come from? Oh, like, where, like, I mean, you had so many people that you could have mined from, and it just felt like this was a previous title that they just reskinned and made it a Ninja Turtles game.
Yeah, but if you look at the cover art, all the turtles have the red bandanas. It's based on the comic book. It's not based on the cartoon though, right?
The original
That's
comics,
right.
yeah.
The original,
much darker.
Mirage
Yeah.
Ultra, yeah.
Yes.
I really liken Batman to like a Batman version of Ninja Gaiden because there's a lot of similar, move sets and the levels are designed similarly. And I would probably put the difficulty rating up there as well.
It wasn't.
Go ahead,
Jay. Mike.
No, you go, Jay.
It wasn't as tight. The controls weren't as tight. Sunsoft is not even close to Tecmo for game companies, and you could really tell Batman was great. Like the graphics were phenomenal, but even his wall jumping stuff was a little slow and sloppy. It wasn't quick and precise like Ninja Gaiden, and that was the problem. I only know. Did you ever finish it, Rob? I can't remember.
Yeah, fuck that. I got to like the last level where you got to go up to the church, and I couldn't get past going up that fucking staircase. It's like worse than going up the fucking floors in Ghostbusters. It's just impossible.
Yeah, those games were, even like the sequel, Return of the Joker, was just relentlessly hard. Like, but even though both of those games were hard, there was something about them that kept you coming back. And I think a lot of it had to do too with the soundtracks on both of the games. Like the Ninja Turtles soundtrack's legendary. Ninja Gaiden, you mentioned, legendary soundtrack, and even the Batman. I put some of the tunes on my show, and I was listening to them again. I'm like, wow, these still rock.
Yeah. Another game that got a lot of mention was River City Ransom. What do you guys think about that?
Oh, absolutely.
Amazing. The game is phenomenal. It was so far ahead of its time. Like, what kind of game is essentially a Double Dragon clone where you actually level up and you get to go into shops and buy power-ups and stuff like that? Like, it was nothing like that at the time. River City Ransom is you have to have this if you have an NES, period.
Yeah, River City Ransom was one of those cult hits. That was kind of stuffed in the back of GamePro that none of my friends had. I was the only one who had this out of my circle of friends. I had to go to the States again to buy that because I couldn't find it very easily.
You had to go to Chicago because they didn't have it in Detroit.
Right? That was where I got all my
Detroit,
NES games. Absolutely, right off the streets. But that's the thing. I got River City Ransom, and it was a bargain. It was like $30 compared to like $70 over here. And I remember it was just like you said, Jay, way too ahead of its time. I think it was just too much for the average gamer to grasp. They didn't get the whole RPG elements, and there were a lot of JRPG elements in that too, like eating and talking and stuff, or getting free smiles, just like little perks that you see a lot in Japanese games, but you don't really necessarily see in North American games. And what's really great about that too, it connects to another game I want to mention, Super Dodgeball. Which I think was made by the same company because they use the same style of sprites. Again, one of the greatest sports sims for the NES. Super Dodgeball, again, one of those cult hits that I still play to this day against people because it just has so much depth.
So go ahead, Jay.
That was an obscure Japanese company called Kimco Sika, yeah, and they were. I remember like playing. I still have Dodgeball, and I agree with you. It's one of the best games. Again, the characters are nice and big and chunky. But talk about a game that has like slowdown and glitches. But even through all the slowdown and glitches, I still had so much fun with that game. It was just well put together.
If you enjoyed Windjammers on the Neo Geo, you can see where it came from. I mean,
for sure.
I remember playing Windjammers and then saying, "Oh my God, Dodgeball was like this game," and I started playing that again because every character had their own special move, and I'm like, "Wow, that's mind blowing."
Okay, so I got 4 more games that were honorable mentions that I had listed here, and I'll let you guys just talk either about all of them or you can stay in depth on one of them. Metal Gear, Bionic Commando, Rad Racer, and RC Pro-Am 2. Go.
Go ahead, Mike.
Let you start this one.
RC Pro-Am, amazing. Again, Rare, where are you and what the fuck happened to you, Microsoft? But RC Pro-Am was phenomenal. I want to tip my hat to Metal Gear. It's by far not the best Metal Gear, but again, way back then, what an ambitious project, despite the spelling mistakes.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I agree. I mean, Metal Gear was basically like one of the first stealth games, and it was so dynamic in the fact that you could nobody would play it the same way, right? And the only problem was that it was marred by a really broken sequel. I remember buying this, and it kept resetting after the first screen. Like I couldn't find a good working copy of Snake's Revenge,
and you couldn't return it because you bought it in the States.
Exactly, because I bought it off, the crack streets of 8 Mile and stuff. Metal Gear really didn't come into form until the PS1 days. I like RC Pro-Am. I think that was, like a great lead into like games like Rock and Roll Racing. It really got down that multiplayer racing down pat by not trying to push the technology too hard. Instead of doing a first-person perspective, going for that 3/4 top-down perspective really made it play well.
And any thoughts on Rad Racer and Bionic Commando, boys?
Rad Racer was decent. I will say Sega's Outrun was the same kind of game, and it was by far a better game. I think, if memory serves me correctly, Rad Racer came out after Outrun. Outrun was out in the arcades.
But Rad Racer was featured in the Wizard with the Power Glove.
And Rad Racer, again, I have to give a shout out to Nintendo World Championships, the game I'm still hunting for. This was a timed championship cart that was a tournament base, and there was timed versions of Super Mario, Rad Racer, and Tetris on it. Still looking for this game, but I'm not rich, so I'll probably never get it.
Go ahead, Mike. Any thoughts on Rad Racer or Bionic Commando?
It's like as Jay said, I played more Outrun because I got a Sega Master System by accident. Like I actually asked for a Nintendo.
you asked for an NES in Florida, and they gave you a Master System.
Exactly. You know how it works in Florida.
Fucking Hurricane Relief Fund.
Absolutely, man. Being a 10-year-old kid, obviously I can't afford to just go drop $200 on an NES to have both. So I had to kind of play what the Sega offered for a couple of years there, and I just got to Outrun. So I never really played Rad Racer when it was in its prime, and I remember it had a really mediocre sequel, so it didn't really catch on as a franchise. So racing for me on the NES is really kind of limited to like RC Pro-Am at that point in terms of memories.
Well, I think that's going to pretty much wrap it up, unless there's other games that you guys want to talk about. I am sure that the results of Final Fantasy being the best NES game outside the Mario trilogy will somehow make its way into the arcades discussion as they record, possibly. And if not, then so be it.
I still gotta say, dude, I'm shocked as shit that you picked Final Fantasy, but hey, it's your show.
It's my fucking show, and I'll pick
My
the fucking
fucking show.
winner.
And
So-
just to finalize, I think it was good that you mentioned Bionic Commander, Rob, because again, that's one of those cult hits that people still love today. That still has a very well calculated game designs challenge. I mean, there's a different way of thinking when you play this game. You don't jump; you have to use your arm for everything, and it really is kind of typical. It's kind of one of those standout ones like Castlevania. That's really typical of the NES platformer. That when you think of like that age, you think of games like Bionic Commando, like Blaster Master. Just has that iconic status. So yeah, I definitely and especially it was awesome to see that HD remake that came out on the PSN.
Well, I thank you both for competing against one another. Clearly, we're all friends, despite the hateful words said at times and whatnot. Congratulations to Jedi J, who I think's won finally a great debate. Mike, you're still in the hunt for.
I'm still
in the hunt. But you will get it one day, I'm sure. This has been The Great Debate. I'm your host, Rob McCallum, and this has been the Wired In Network. We will see you again shortly.